Hey guys, welcome to the How They Did It podcast. I'm here with Nick Shaw. He's the owner of RP Strength, Fit to Success. His book, I read it a couple weeks ago. I reached out to Nick, I think it was 2 days ago, and he graciously got on our super small podcast. We're super happy to have him here. Nick, thank you so much. I'm glad to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
So, Nick, I'm just going to jump straight in here. I know obviously you've had a lot of success with RP Strength. I want you to tell me a little bit about your history before you actually opened RP Strength. I think with Dr. Mike Israetel, if I'm not wrong. Maybe give us what you were doing beforehand.
Yeah. So Mike and I both went to University of Michigan. That's where we met in undergrad. We were both, really, really into fitness, both into lifting. Met in the gym. He convinced me to do a powerlifting meet, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds awesome! I'll give it a shot." I was immediately hooked in just like the competitive lifting space. Thought that maybe I'd like to compete in bodybuilding someday. And so Mike sort of helped coach me through that. After I graduated from college, him and I both ended up in New York City, where probably similar to yourself, we were personal trainers and we were in Manhattan. So we were training the likes of some of the smartest, brightest people in the entire world that, work in finance, whatever, all this big stuff in New York. Really, really cool. We met so many awesome people. It's actually where I met my wife, who I'm still married to now, 11, 12 years later. So a lot of good came from that. I lived in New York City for about 6 years. I now live in Charlotte, North Carolina. But it was through that personal training that I realized I didn't know if that was a long-term sustainable career because you had to travel all over New York City and all that, especially at that time. I was a nobody personal trainer. So it's really just any client that I could kind of get. I would go wherever in the city and, train them, and probably not making a ton, especially for living in New York City.
Yeah.
And yeah, totally, right? Like I'm sure you know the whole deal. But
Yeah.
we got into doing a little bit of online coaching, and lo and behold, that was something like 12 years ago. Was actually the start of RP. Just Mike and I joining and starting a little company where we were training people online, and obviously it's grown over the last decade or so into something really, really cool that I'm super proud of.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have done amazing work. I personally eat up a whole bunch of your guys' content, your ebooks, and everything. I think you guys are fantastic. I actually recommend your guys to clients of mine that once I step away, I go, guys, listen, if you guys want to do it, I know it's not exactly the same as having a person there, but you guys can download the RP. You're one of the two or three people that I highly recommend your guys' company to go to. So I wanted to ask the questions, kind of take it back. No, now you obviously have created a lot of rules for success, and in your book, Fit to Success, I kind of looked at it like it was almost like a meta-analysis of
Yeah.
all the self-help books that you might have read, and I've read a lot of them. Starting out my career, when I was a young kid, I wanted to fight in the UFC. I was obese. I was 265 pounds at 16 years old. And I was like, nah, I'm going to become a UFC fighter. I read all those books and they helped change my life into the plan. I actually made it to the UFC as a 145-pound fighter. Um, but those
Hell yeah.
books really helped me. And I stopped reading it for a long time because at some point I almost became a level to me like mental masturbation. I was reading the books, but I stopped taking more action on what I was reading in the books. And your book kind of summarized it all. It was like the first. I'm putting under self help. I think it's more than that, but that's just the category I'm adding it. Uh, the first time that I read, I was like, it kind of reignited everything because it was like a jolt of all these messages that synchronize in from you see from all the books.
Yeah. So at RP, what we do is we put everything in terms of like a pyramid of priorities, and you can do that for diet, you can do that for training, you can do that for recovery. And so where I thought I could add some value was what about outside of fitness? What can we do? What are the kind of the staples? Because I found this infatuation of I've always, I don't know, been a little bit different than everybody else, and then I was always like trying to do more, learn more, whatever it was. It was sports when I was younger, getting into bodybuilding, whatever. But you can apply all that to business. And so my thought was, what are the overlapping principles that a lot of successful people have? Because I was reading like a bunch of different books, and I would notice these common themes, whether it was fitness, whether it was personal finance, whether it was psychology, whatever. It just, to me, it stood out as like, oh wow, like that is a very similar theme to what this person said, and these are completely unrelated fields. And I just started making a bunch of notes, and then eventually I kind of whittled it down to like these 10 main things, and then I was able to combine some of those and ended up with a pyramid of success that I came up with. Dr. Mike helped me a little bit as well. And so that's where we came up with the pyramid of success. And so, there's like 7 of them. And I think that in order to be successful, you got to start at the bottom, and then you got to work your way up, because like a pyramid, you have to have that foundational piece there before you can move up to the next one. But if you were to take one level off of it, right, like you get a lot less of the total overall pyramid, so you get a lot less overall success. And so that's kind of how they all intertwine. And yeah, I'm just really fascinated with successful people and seeing what they do and what the different things are that they all have in common.
Yeah, one of the chapters that I liked the most was failure. In the beginning, when I first saw, I was I did a quick look through the chapters, and I saw failure as one of the lines on the pyramid, and I was like, oh, I'm curious where he's going to go with this. And once I read it, it really hit home to me. That it really like clicked. Like, yeah, what I like the most is at the end, you made an emphasis on failure, that not only, yes, you do have to take risks to fail, but don't make such big failures as, like, let's say, I think you used the analogy of a dad wanting to be a rock star that has a stable job, like not to quit his stable, that has a family and a stable job, not to quit his stable job to go become a rock star, but to do it on the side as a hobby. And I was like, yeah, that's a very, like, it's more of like a logical approach, it felt like to me, than just a lot of times you'll read like, oh, just take the leap. Well, it's like there is some real life circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. So where some people just make that huge quantum leap, so to speak, sometimes it works, and those people are usually the outliers. And then you don't hear about the stories of like the 10,000 people that took that same leap that completely failed, fell on their face, and that's what's a term, right? It's you only hear the bias of only successful people, essentially.
Yeah,
And
it's
like you
like
don't see
survival
all.
bias.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I didn't know I was missing that word. So the more logical approach might be, hey, I've got a 9 to 5 boring job that I, kind of just show up and do, and I don't really like it, and I got this other thing that I want to pursue on the side. Okay, well, I might not just quit one day and just only do that other thing, but guess what? You slowly start working on that other thing on the side. It slowly but gradually builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up, kind of the point where then one day you can go, you know what? Let's say I'm making whatever $50,000 at this office job. I'm making almost that, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. Now I can actually quit that, and I can just do this, and like I don't have to take that huge risk, right? And then like a lot of people tend to miss that, and they just want to, on day one, just quit what they're doing now and just pick up that other thing. I mean, hey, it might work for some, but also, holy crap, like if you mess up, especially if you have a family or something like that, like not necessarily take that risk. And I think there's some authors out there, like maybe it was Adam Grant. Who said something like that in one of his books, that like you can not take that huge risk, and you can slowly take that risk over time. You might end up being a lot more successful because of that. But yeah, like everyone's going to fail, everyone's going to make mistakes. I'm kind of working on kicking around some ideas in my head now of maybe a future like keynote of just like a bunch of lessons that I've learned over the years, and they basically all involve failure. So you don't have to be afraid to fail. Like everyone's going to fail, so don't let that stop you. Go ahead and get started anyways, and like all those little mistakes you make along the way will actually make you better in the long term. Because guess what? Like you make mistakes, so long as you don't keep repeating it, you'll learn. You'll get a little bit better. Like that's usually what success means. It's not being successful in spite of failure, or in lack of failure, I should say. But it's because you learn from your failures along the way. You make those little mistakes. You just keep getting better and better.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's funny that in my current life right now, I'm doing something similar to this. Like I basically I do this job. I told you before the podcast. It's very running around the world. It's hard for me to do other things. So I'm constantly on the move. But I wanted to start doing stuff online, and just because I know eventually I'm going to need to sit down, and like my wife's going to want me to stay home, for a while.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
And so, yeah, so I'm gonna have to eventually do it. And the idea crossed my mind, like, okay, should I just stop and go into this? Now I have zero online. Like I have a very small presence, and I'm really gonna go from 0 to 100. And I was like, well, I'm going to keep my job and build this as much as I can to the best of my abilities. I'll use, as much as I can that I'm not affecting the job that I'm doing to keep my clients happy because they deserve that and to be able to hopefully progress. I'll give my best. And a part of me felt kind of guilty about this because I was like, you're really not giving everything you could. Like, there's a lot you're holding back because, you're also in this job. And when I read that in the book, it kind of was like okay, I'm making sense here. I'm not being crazy. I'm not being lazy about this. I'm not being too fearful. Like I am taking logical steps.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what's really interesting is the in-person experience gives you tons of potential social proof, resources, testimonials, references, things like that that you can use online. So if you need
Yeah,
content to go online, guess what? Like all of your clients have questions that they ask you probably every single day. That's all content right there. That's all pieces of little nuggets you can draw upon to create your own content. And like a lot of people are scared of getting online and doing that because they're like, oh, what do I have to say? I don't have anything to say. Well, that could be true. But also, if you are working with people in person, I usually encourage people to start in person to build up a little bit of a base, get some type of presence. And there's also just the interpersonal communication skills of working with people one on one, like
yeah,
in person. Like you can't be too socially awkward if you're going to work with people in person.
yeah,
So there's a lot of skills that you can learn. And then guess what? Like they have tons and tons of questions they're going to ask you. Like just think about those, make some notes or something in your phone, and that's all stuff you can come back to and make some content based on that. And guess what? If someone's asking you that in person, there's gonna be a bunch of people that have those same questions online that you can draw from.
yeah. I think you're on point, and that's actually what I'm trying to do at the moment. I'm gonna ask another selfish question that the audience would be like, "Come on, don't go there." But I'm gonna ask one more selfish. If you had to start today, because you started, I think RP Strength was it 2017 or 18? I'm getting a bit confused.
It's actually a lot farther back than that. It was something like 2011 when we officially
Oh
started.
wow,
But there was definitely a few years there where we were just doing a lot of online coaching before we got into like the digital product space, before we got into like building our templates and then later apps. Because yeah, I mean the apps didn't come out until about 2019, but there was definitely a lot of years before that. And it's interesting that you say that because a lot of people, when they see other people online doing stuff, they sometimes miss that like first, I don't know, we call it 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, or whatever. We're like, you're unheard of. No one knows of you, and you have to. It's like a slow, gradual build. But there comes a point where like just that momentum starts to build, and like let's say you get 10,000. Well, guess what? Now you're at 10,000 or whatever. Like you start being seen by more people, and it's a little bit quicker to build from there. Now multiply that by years and years and years, and you get up to 50,000, 100,000, whatever that number is. Like it just becomes a little bit easier because then it's like it's the ultimate social proof. We're seeing that now on the YouTube, where like we started the year 400,000 subscribers on YouTube, and like that had taken a couple years to build just to get there. We're about to hit 1 million on YouTube, and it's almost like the snowball effect, where once it gets going, it just becomes a little bit easier because now we have people reaching out to us. Hey, can you do a collab? Can you do some video, something like that? Whereas before it was almost like they were doing a favor to us. Well, now there's that like mutual, collaborative effect where it's like, oh, you can come on our channel, and then hey, we'll do a video where you're on that, but hey, can you do one that's on your channel? And then everyone benefits, and then it's much more reciprocal in nature.
That makes perfect sense. I think it has that compounding effect. It's kind of like
Exactly.
you're investing in the markets over time. It just
Yes.
out of nowhere, it's like one person sees it, two people, now those two people, and it just keeps going and going and going over time. You got to have that patience. By the way, that's another interesting thing I found out about you through your Instagram is you invest. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, you invest mostly in index funds. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah, that's correct. So, personal finance investing is very similar to fitness. and that everyone wants to, get like that one big magical thing that's gonna like make you rich overnight or get you the ripped abs or whatever it is. And it's like, it just doesn't work like that. There's maybe a few outlier cases out there, but those are few and far between. So what you really have to do is you just have to do those little boring things day in and day out. Like eating mostly healthy foods, getting your exercise in versus, sitting on the couch and eating junk food. Like, that stuff sucks, right? It sucks doing all that work. Just like everyone wants that little quick investment tip that's going to just make them a millionaire overnight. That's why so many people, buy lotto tickets. It's not real life, folks. I mean, like, one person out of like 1 billion wins the lottery. So you can't really rely on that. But guess what? You can start investing a little bit. And it's just like growing that social media base. You start with $1. Well, guess what? Now that becomes, $1 every month, or it just starts to get a little bit more exponential. But can people stay the course in those early days when almost seemingly nothing is happening? And if you can get past that early period, now that period might even be the span of a couple of years. But when you're 10 years down the road and you look back, you're like, wow, going from zero to like $100 invested was really, really hard. It took forever. And then all of a sudden it's like that 100 now becomes 200, maybe 6 months later. And then 200 becomes 400 4 months later, right? Like it becomes quicker and quicker and quicker. But can you get through that really boring, sucky part in the beginning? And that's where a lot of people fall off because like, I can't do this. Or like, this is never going to happen. By and large, people that are successful have a much longer term time horizon, and they're willing to do those little things. Like, so you mentioned compound effect. That's actually a great book, very similar to the slight edge principle. And it's all that same stuff where like, can you do those little things day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out? All of a sudden, like, it starts with nothing, and then over time, it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And those are the people that do that stuff for 5, 10, 15, 20, a whole lifetime. Those are the people that are incredibly successful. But man, it takes a lot of patience. It sucks.
Yeah, I think it's the patience and the discipline. Have you always been very disciplined? I mean, I mentioned the book that your parents raised you, and they're very disciplined people. I personally was not a very disciplined person, and I've tried to build my way into discipline. It's like a constant battle.
Yeah.
Has it always come easy to you?
So that's a really interesting question. Yeah. Well, no, I'm glad you phrased it that way because simple is not necessarily easy, and my dad was always a very hardworking person, so I probably have some like genetic predisposition to that. But also, like, I was a little chubby kid as well. Like, it wasn't until I got into like middle school, early high school, where I started to, kind of lean out. I got a little bit more into running, and I always, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I wasn't okay with just being normal or average. I wanted no part of that. And still, that's just part of my psyche. Absolutely, that's probably just a genetic thing because I don't think everyone has it. But you can build upon it. It's probably a skill that can be improved upon. I've never wanted to just set back and be average or be normal. I mean, heck, that's why I got into bodybuilding. And I wasn't okay just being like, a bodybuilder. Like, I wanted to be a professional bodybuilder. And like, I was able to do that earlier this year. Like, I can't set back and be normal, average. It eats at me if I am, and I just would never be happy if I chose to live that way.
That's super interesting. I mean, I figured as much because I know that bodybuilding. I've been lean actually very recently. One of my clients bet me because during on the road, keeping in a good amount of shape is pretty hard. No excuse, I could, but it was not worth it considering everything else I was giving up. And my client was like, "Oh, you're getting a bit chubby. I bet you can't get lean in X amount of weeks." It was. I bet you this much money you can't do it. And I'm like, take it. And I got very lean for my standards. Like when I got my body fat measured, it was like 10% body fat.
That's really good.
Yeah, it was pretty lean, and I got it. I think I did it in 7 weeks. I lost like 25 pounds, and it was brutal. And I remember while I did it, when I got my body fat tested, I saw a trainer, and he was like, "Oh man, like you got broad shoulders. Don't you ever think about trying to compete? Like take a few years building?" I was like, "Absolutely not. I was like, absolutely, this is tough. I'm like, I'm gonna do this on purpose multiple times a year. No, thank you. I'm good. Thanks, guys.
I will freely admit that bodybuilders are crazy, and I wouldn't recommend that most people do it. Um, it's totally cool, man, to just be lean and live like, a somewhat normal life where, eating well and exercise is a good part of your life. Like, that's awesome. There's just, I don't know, man. It probably is something genetics where, like, my dad is like super obsessed with like hunting and fishing. I never got that. I don't. Those are probably two things I hate more than anything in the world. But that, like, obsession and passion was just driven into a different avenue, and mine happened to be bodybuilding and fitness, and this is what it is. Like, I love it for the most part, and there's something about like the challenge. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to that. Like, going back to the UFC days, like there's just something about having some type of personal challenge, like a physical one, where like it's gonna suck. It's not necessarily fun day in and day out to do, but it's like, can you just enjoy the process along the way? And I tried to, at least, when I was in those really crappy days of like the tail ends of dieting before, you get on stage and just pretty much everything's miserable, just try to remind myself, this is voluntary. I'm choosing to do this because I love it. You just got to enjoy the process. It's going to suck now, but hey, it's because I'm trying to get this particular outcome, this particular result. And, maybe you get it, maybe you don't, but you just kind of love that process. And, real quick, that's kind of related, but so I had a goal since I was probably, I don't know, 17, 18. I was like reading bodybuilding magazines and becoming a IFBB pro. Like, that's what it's called. It's probably similar to like competing in UFC to become a professional fighter.
Yeah.
And then like I achieved that goal earlier this year in the summer. And then like a couple weeks later, I was like, now what do I do?
Now.
Yeah, exactly. Now what? It's like, that was cool.
No.
I'm glad that I did it, right? I hit that goal, but what the hell am I going to do now with myself? Like, I need something else.
Yeah.
I need another goal. I need something to aim for. And like, that's just part of the process where it really is, the journey, not the destination.
100%. I also liked when I remember fighting. It was that like single-minded focus. It was like
Yes.
everything in my life kind of cut into that, and that was something I miss even to this day. I kind of do that with business now,
Yeah.
but it's a little bit different because it's that physical. There's that end date. While in business, it's a infinite game. It's just going to continue. So one last thing, I want to get into some training things because I find something interesting. I see that I don't know if you still do, but at some point you were into CrossFit. That actually was one of the reasons why I started following you, because I started following Mike originally on Instagram, and then you popped up and I saw you, he post something, and then he said you did CrossFit, and I saw how jacked you were, and I'm like, man, this guy's fucking jacked for a CrossFitter, and he's big. He doesn't look like, well, a lot of the CrossFitters are jacked, but they're 175 pounds. And I looked and I saw it. I'm like, do you still do CrossFit? And how do you fit that into your hypertrophy training?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I don't currently do CrossFit. So it was, you just mentioned that, like, single, dedicated, just focus. Everything in life is, around this one thing. So when, basically during COVID and whatnot, like I was training a little bit hypertrophy. I would do, one day kind of CrossFit style. My goal was like, if someone on a random day was like, hey, time to do Murph, I'd be ready to go. Any day of the week, I could get down and I could do it. Like, that was my goal. So that's kind of how I trained. And then I got back into more of the serious bodybuilding scene, like, let's call it early 2021, something like that. Like, I did a little diet, kind of like you had mentioned. I ran like a 6-week diet. I got like pretty lean, 9-10%. And that spark was reignited in me. And I was like, oh, now I remember this. And that's what led me, because I was like, you know what? If I'm going to make a serious run at this, I'm not going to half-ass it. I'm gonna stop, doing the high intensity cardio. I'm gonna stop doing the jiu-jitsu. I'm gonna stop doing the CrossFit. Everything's gonna go towards becoming a professional bodybuilder. So I very specifically made that trade-off to go back to this, put all of my focus, effort into training like a bodybuilder, and it did pay off. But there's definitely something to that of, it can be hard to dabble in a bunch of different areas. And I think there's something to be said of just that singular focus and really honing in on that one particular goal that you have. And if you can do that, you're going to increase your probability of being successful because you're so laser focused on that, rather than kind of being distracted by all this little other stuff.
Nick, I want to thank you so much for coming on. We hit the 25-minute mark. Unfortunately, I have to go to the airport, and I hate that I have to cut this short. But no, I super appreciate it. I want to say, honestly, to anyone that watches this, if you guys are into fitness, if you're into just anything you want to succeed in life, Fit for Success. It's a great book, and I don't recommend books lightly. I told my friend it was like the meta analysis of self help books. It was fantastic. You did a great job. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I really hope we can have you again.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much. I appreciate the recommendation. That's pretty much exactly what the book was kind of meant to be. Just like, rather than this really long, drawn out thing, like, hey, no, let's short and sweet, kind of get to the point and give some, action items at the end of each chapter so people can actually do and implement. So that way you're not just reading 100 different books and nothing really happens. Like, no, like let's do some shit. Let's take some action. Let's make some positive changes.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Nick.
Man. Thank you.